All right, so next we're going to talk about EQ or equalization. This is probably one of the more familiar things that we're going to talk about because most people understand EQ in some basic form. The most basic thing we've all understood from probably the early days of when we either used a CD player, if you're old enough, to an iPod, to your iPhone, some form of music player, you've worked with an EQ at some point where you control bass, mids, and treble, or low, mids, and highs, however you like to think of it. But basically, those are the three main categories that most people understand when it comes to EQ, and knowing that we like to boost or cut some of them depending on what we want to do. So let's actually look at what that looks like in the live audio world and look at an equalizer and how we can use that. So in this example of EQ, we're actually going to be talking specifically about the parametric EQ that most of these digital boards have. So as you can see, I've got a EQ pulled up here. This is a parametric EQ. It's a 4-band parametric EQ with an additional high pass filter dedicated. And we can use this EQ to shape our sound, to remove things that we don't want or to add things that we do want. So in this example, to kind of demonstrate what each frequency range is and the tools available to us, we're going to listen to a vocal here and we're going to kind of show what each tool does, how they behave, and then how we can use them to make this vocal sound as good as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and play this track here just so we can have it in there. All right, so it's playing. And as you can see, there's a lot of information in this vocal, but we're going to specifically start from left to right. And the reason is because a low-end information is probably the first thing that always needs to be handled when it comes to EQ. So the first tool we have to use at our disposal is a high-pass filter. And this is the #1 EQ tool you will be using just about on every instrument. At some point or another, a high-pass filter is needed because every microphone is going to pick up low-end information that we don't need. Even DIs will pick up low-end information that we just don't need or we don't need to have as much of. So what does a high-pass filter do? Well, it is in the name, actually. It lets the high information pass through it and filters out the low-end information. And all there is to with a high-pass filter is what frequency do we want this filter to start pulling that frequency information down, and then we can choose usually the slope or how aggressive this is. So let's take a look actually at this specifically on this console, which we have a high pass filter. We have the option to choose where we start high passing all the way up to 2 kilohertz down to 20 hertz. And then we have our slope option, which you can see, we'll bring it out here. You can either do a super steep curve. This is a 24 decibel Butterworth slope is what it's referred to here. Or you could do a 12 dB or something in between. And as you can see with the 12, it's not nearly as dramatic of a cut. It's not as steep of a curve. I usually like to work with the 12 dB because it tends to be a little bit more musical. I find that it doesn't shave off so much low-end information to the point where I feel like I either have it on or have it off. It actually feels like it's like slowly tapering it off. But depending on your setup, your needs, you may need a steeper curve. So let's actually listen to what this sounds like on this vocal. So we're going to turn our high pass all the way down. We'll turn it on. Actually, we'll turn it off here. So I've got our high pass filter all the way down, and we're going to listen to the vocal here.
It's like I'm living for the first time.
And we'll turn it on here.
Living for the first time.
We'll start turning it up.
I'm living for the first time. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to have 600 hertz.
This is what you do. This is what you do.
All right, so that's all the way up until 2 kilohertz. Listen close.
This is what you do.
So as you can hear, we actually cut all the low-end information out and let only the high information pass through. That is the complete role of a high-pass filter. So how do we actually use this? Well, let's take a listen again, and let's listen to the low-end information and make sure you have really good either headphones or good monitors to listen to this on so you can really understand what we're trying to focus on. So let's listen again.
This is what you do. This is what you do. You make me come alive. This is what you do.
So I don't know if you could hear, but there's a lot of this low-end boom bass kind of feel from like what's happening in the room around the microphone that we can hear, maybe even the PA coming in. There's also just quite a bit of low-end information in his voice that we don't need. It's stuff that would actually go to the subs, stuff that's 40, 50, 60, 80, even 100 hertz. We don't need that in a vocal. In fact, depending on the vocal itself, the vocal mic you're using, and what sound you're going for, you may want to use this filter as high as 200 hertz. So let's listen to what it sounds like to use this high pass filter at a more appropriate level. And this is just a basic idea of where we could use it. It's not the perfect use for every time, but let's just take a listen and see what it sounds like.
'Cause this is what you do, this is what you do. You make me come alive, this is what you do, this is what you do. You make me come alive, this is what you do.
So that's at about 200 hertz. Now let's listen to it on and off so we can hear the difference between that high pass filter on and engaged and off.
Ooh, here we go. 'Cause this is what you do, this is what you do. You make me come alive, this is what you do, this is what you do. You make me come alive.
So I don't know if you could feel that difference of that low end disappearing, but that's all stuff that we don't want to come into our vocal mic because it's stuff that is going to be covered by everything else that's already on the stage, from the bass guitar, from the kick drum and all that stuff. Those already have their own microphones on there, and we don't need that information in that vocal channel. So we're going to get rid of it. The other thing too is we don't need those low information of the vocals in our subs and everything when they're just not needed. We don't normally hear that anyway or feel that as much as we would with a PA system. So we can remove that and pull it out. Now, let's go to, say, a kick drum and listen to what it does when we have the high pass filter on that. So here's our kick drum just as it is, no EQ, no gating, no anything. Now let's turn the high pass filter on at 100 hertz. Now let's roll it down. And we'll turn it off. Okay, so what did we just hear? What we heard was a kick drum fully open with all of the 20 hertz to 200 hertz information that fully going through our system. Then we heard it with that information starting to get cut off at about 100 hertz or so. And then we ducked it down all the way to that 20 hertz point where 20 hertz below was starting to get cut off. So why would we ever want to use a high pass filter on, say, a kick drum? Well, a lot of times there's a lot of over information that we don't need captured or reproduced in our PA system by even things that we want to have low end. You see, if you fight a lot in your mixes with having too much low end, or maybe your low end doesn't feel very tight, it feels very flubby, or maybe not as thick as you want it to. So you're just find something just doesn't feel right with the low end. It's probably not that you don't have enough of it. It's probably that you have too much of it. See, high pass filters do two things. They help us cut information from things that we don't want to have going to our subs, but we also use it to help tame the information that's going to the subs. So again, I'll use the high pass filter even on things like bass guitar, which is a low end information instrument that I want to have go to my subs, but I don't need the full volume of every single frequency in that low end range going to my sub at full power. I may sometimes want to duck it back. Now, you could use our next EQ here in just a moment to accomplish this, but I like to use the high pass filter because I know, A, my system can't reproduce 20 hertz and below, so I will go ahead and get rid of that information because I know it's not going to even be heard. So let's try and not send information to my system that doesn't even need to be reproduced or attempted to be reproduced. And two, we're going to go ahead and use that to help tighten things up and clean things up a little bit. So that way we're not using so much low-end information that our speakers can't even keep up with everything.